as global oil price averages continue to trend downwards below the US $30 per barrel mark. We spoke with the Energy Minister at the Trinidad and Tobago Energy Conference at the Hyatt Regency Hotel about that matter in the context of the oil price on which the Trinidad and Tobago budget is partly based. The budgeted oil price is US $45 per barrel. Is this something the government would have to revisit, the budgeted price of oil and gas for the budget?
Well, we certainly are monitoring it very closely, and we are having constant discussions to see if it is necessary for us to revisit it right now, or if maybe on the media review, then we'll probably make a statement on that.
On the final day of the conference, the Planning Minister announced a carbon emission reduction plan that includes the continuation of a mass transit system coupled with a phased reduction of the fuel subsidy. But should such a plan, expected to comprise a railway, be considered when the global oil price is well below the budgeted price?
All we have done is asked the IDB to look at how feasible it would be. We have not asked them to fund anything. We have not even made a decision on the mass transit system.
The minister said the government has decided to withdraw $153 million out of the Green Fund for 8 renewable energy projects, including a study to assess wind generation capacity. The energy minister said legislation is on the way to allow for solar panel use.
In terms of solar access onto the grid, we have developed a fee and tariff policy which would speak to how when persons do their own generation, how that could feed into the national grid.
Jewel Brown, TV6 News.
Okay, welcome back, folks. It's 11 minutes past 6 o'clock, and here to give us an idea of how all of this affects the labor movement is Mr. Ozzi Warwick. He's a member of JTUM, the Joint Trade Union Movement, and of course the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. Mr. Warwick, welcome to Morning Edition.
Good morning. Thank you very much, and good morning to Trinidad and Tobago. Good to be here with you, Hayden.
Yes, and all the best to you and yours for 2016.
Same to you and the rest of Trinidad and Tobago, because 2016 is going to be quite an
interesting
year. Interesting and exciting year.
But the first thing I wanted to ask you, though, in terms of you're representing the Joint Trade Union Movement, but this does not cover the entire trade union movement. There are other factions of that movement that do not fall under this umbrella. That other faction represents which aspect of the labor force?
Well, first of all, the Joint Trade Union Movement actually comprises of members of both NATUC, which is the National Trade Union Center, as well as FITAN, the Federation of Independent Trade Unions and NGOs. But it also takes into consideration unions that are not part of either of those federations. For example, TUTA. So TUTA is a member of JTUM. But what is critical is the sector in which the Oilfield Workers Trade Union represents. Right. Which, and of course, and that is the topic of the day, whole question of energy and oil prices. But you know, Hayden, it is important for us to understand how we got here. And it's not just simply a question of falling oil prices. In June of 2014, on Labor Day, the President General of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union warned the country that we were facing an economic crisis. As a matter of fact, it was on that platform we were able to expose the issue of the foreign exchange crisis, because up until that time, people were not aware that there was a foreign exchange crisis. We warned that there is an economic crisis. And then in June, that was June 2014, in June 2015, 1 year later, on Labor Day, the President General again, Comrade Ansel Roger talked about the fact that we had a fall in the energy sector in terms of growth. It went from 2.8% to 1%. We had a fall in terms of oil production between 2010 and 2014 from 98,300 barrels of oil per day to 81,300. So whilst oil prices would have been over $100 a barrel, which was in June 2014, instead of ramping up production, we lost production almost 20,000 barrels per day. In addition to that, there was a sharp decrease in the manufacturing sector in terms of growth, agriculture, no sustainable jobs, increase in prices. We were warning that the country was heading into and this is before the oil prices started to collapse. So I think it's important to remind ourselves how we end up here. You know why? Because we tend to repeat history, and we don't want to repeat history. So let us be very clear how we end up where we end up. Now, there are two paths in a situation like this. You can either take the path of austerity, or you can take the path of growth. In other words, if you have a shrinking economy as a result of the fall in oil prices, what you want to be able to do is not cut your way out of the crisis, but grow your way out of the crisis. In other words,
how are we going to, if we were to adopt an overall expansionist approach to this crisis, how do we grow our way out of this?
Well, one of the first things we need to do is we need to ramp up production. Because if we've lost some 20, and the thing is we have the model. In 2012, the OWTU presented to the then government a model to restructure Petrotrin in order for us to increase production and increase refined products. We had a model. That model was implemented for 3 months under the then Minister of Energy, Caroline C. Prasad-Bechan. And you know what that did? That model, when followed, brought us some additional 3,000 barrels per oil per day in Trinma alone. We also had a solution with regards to ramping up the production of indigenous crude on land. When they changed the Minister of Energy and they brought in the new Minister of Energy, Kevin Ramnarine, he squashed that project, squashed that model. So the point is that we have a solution. We have a model that has worked, that has brought us additional crude. So we need to be able to do that. We also need to look at the project, the Southwest Soldado project. That project can bring us an additional 10,000 barrels of oil per day. In other words, Hayden, what I'm suggesting is that we have been able to develop models and a proposal which can see us increase our production. The other thing we need to do, in addition to increase production in terms of indigenous crude, we also need to expand our product line. In other words, in Trinidad and Tobago, we don't just sell oil, we refine oil, meaning that we are able to produce products such as kerosene, diesel, airplane fuel, and so on. So, in fact, we can use this opportunity as the oil price is low. In other words, you know, the Chinese have the saying, turning a threat into an opportunity, and turn it into an opportunity where we can import the cheap oil to be able to increase and expand our refined products. Now, and therefore maximize our profit margin.
There are a couple of things. There are a couple of things that people want to know in terms of the refinery capacity, given the and also the ability of this refinery to produce these various products. This is aging infrastructure that we're talking about.
Yes.
What kind of investment is required to bring this infrastructure up to the level where it can produce these higher value-added products?
Well, a few things. In a few years ago, if you recall, there was some major turnovers taking place in order to bring some of the plants up to mark. And we intervened because of the issue of corruption and mismanagement. And we said, listen, we have to be able to bring these plants on stream in terms of its quick turnover so that we can maximize the opportunity that was there. And this is another point that is critical, political interference. We have to find a way, Hayden, to insulate these crown jewels, these important industries, from political interference. Because political interference, mismanagement creates a problem.
Now,
it makes a problem even worse.
Right, but let me ask you this. We have witnessed over the years all kinds of issues taking place in terms of the governance of Petrotrin, the management of Petrotrin.
Yeah.
We have questioned the way in which that very Soldado project has been managed.
That's correct.
The issue of the GTL plant, and all of these issues remain very current in terms of getting this particular refinery to work as it should. Is the Petrotrin model a broken model, and do we need to re-engineer it?
And that is why in 2012 the Oilfield Workers Trade Union presented such a model. We came up with the support and with the workforce, with an idea as to how we can restructure the company to make it more efficient and increase productivity. The union did that. So that I think it is important that we highlight that positive aspect in terms of the contribution that the union has made. And we said to the then board of directors with a presentation. Hey, this is how we can ensure that Petrotrin survives. We knew and we had the idea that oil prices will not stay over $100 a barrel, and therefore we came up with a model that can see us weather the storm.
So what was the reason for rejecting the model after a Minister of Energy had adopted it?
Well, you know what happened. It was the government at that time, the UNC government, took a stand to fight against the oilfield workers trade union and the progressive trade union movement, and we had to be in the streets, if you recall, almost month after month, talking about the corruption, talking about the political interference, talking about the nepotism, talking about the mismanagement and the wastage, and therefore, so what is the solution going forward?
But we have two issues here. Not only do we have a volume issue, an output issue that we need to address quickly, but we also have a price issue.
Yes.
Because, I mean, yesterday, I think Brent and West Texas intermediate prices fell below 28 per barrel.
It's 26.7.
Right? Yeah.
$26.
So it seems as though the price slide continues. How do we then look strategically at our energy sector and determine what direction is the most appropriate direction for us to pursue? Because not only is there a volume problem, but there's also a price problem.
Yeah, and of course we have no control over price. We are price takers, we are not price givers. However, what we can or what we do have control over is production. And we have not been able to optimize, maximize production of indigenous crude in this country for a long time. And I think we have to ramp up production in order to buffer the low prices. And we have to also ensure that our refinery is working at a maximum in order, in case or when there is low oil prices, to actually turn that into an opportunity for us in terms of the refined products. So I think
what about our cost, though, in terms of our cost of production? At what point does it become uneconomic for us to even produce the oil?
Well, we have an advantage, unlike many other countries, in that a lot of it is subsidized, so that in terms of electricity, our electricity is very cheap. Again, using low gas prices in order to, in other words, you use this opportunity of these low prices to ensure that your cost is low, and therefore you maximize in terms of the amount of products that you're able to produce, because the cost is also falling.
Good. Let's talk about costs as far as the cost of wages, the cost of salaries in terms of running these enterprises. I think it was a couple of months ago that it was initiated, this current cabinet initiated a wage freeze at NGC. What is JTEM's position in terms of a wages and incomes policy as we move through these difficult times?
Well, first of all, we believe that job cuts, salary cuts, wage freeze, or these elements of austerity is not the answer. And it's not going to, for one thing, it's not going to help with the growth aspect, simply because we want productivity. And you therefore need to create an incentive for workers to be productive. Now, one of the things that we have to be careful of when we talk about wages and salaries, especially when we talk about the energy sector in terms of the labor force is something like 3.8%, of the labor force, but contributes some 45% to the revenue side, not the expenditure side, the revenue side of our balance sheet. We believe that we have to, in this particular period, we have to be able to increase, believe it or not, jobs. And I'll give you an example. When faced with the economic crisis, 2008, 2009, some European countries took the path of austerity, to cut jobs, to cut salaries, etc. Now they're struggling to grow. The United States right now, notwithstanding China and Europe, United States is the only part of the world that's showing some level of growth. You know why? Because they took a position to increase jobs. So every month they were monitoring how many new jobs were being created. What we're saying is, listen, why don't we try something innovative? How about not just have workers shoulder the burden of adjustment, but what about the business community? How about we increase corporate tax from 25% to 30% with an incentive that you can claim back that tax if you show that you're able to create new jobs, if you're able to reinvest in technology, research and development. In other words, we have to find innovative ways to stimulate the economy and therefore grow the economy outside of the knee-jerk reaction of just taking a swipe and just cutting like we're going crazy. Because you know what can happen? When you think you're in a bad situation, Hayden, you know it can get worse?
Of course it can get worse, and we probably haven't seen the bottom of oil prices as yet. So the question then is, going back to the issue of productivity, how does the labor movement intend to work with the government and the private sector to improve the productivity issue across all the sectors, not just the energy sector, but all sectors? What are some of the strategies that the labor movement is prepared to put on the table to improve worker productivity?
Well, first of all, what is critical, and it came out in our Memorandum of Understanding, which was signed last year. And in the Memorandum of Understanding has built in it this idea of the tripartite mechanism. We have to be able to sit around the table as equal partners. Not you coming to tell me after the fact what your policy is going to be, but you sit with me as an equal partner. I'm talking now about government and business, sitting with labor as an equal partners, discussing how can we grow this economy. That's the discussion. I don't think having superficial discussions about productivity is going to be helpful. What we need are more fundamental discussions about productivity. How do we grow the economy? We believe that the tripartite mechanism is going to be absolutely critical at this stage. In other words, let me tell you what we don't expect. What we certainly would not expect is announcements being made maybe in March when they do the review of the budget.
Right, the mid-year review.
Mid-year review, to our surprise. That will not be accepted. We believe that the Prime Minister has indicated in his address to the nation that he's committed to the tripartite process. So critical for the country right now, and this is for the future of Trinidad and Tobago, is to ensure that we have the tripartite mechanism up and running and that all partners are treated equally, because we come to the table with solutions, as I've shown earlier. We come to the table with ideas as to how we can not, well, increase productivity, but also how we can motivate the national workforce focus around growing the economy.
Now, we've been talking about this tripartite approach and so on over the past few months. What moves have been made by either of the parties involved to get this process started? Well,
the idea would be that the process should begin as early as early February, within the first week or two of February.
That's Carnival Week.
It's Carnival Week, but you know, in this period of time, they always say struggle knows no season. So whilst we enjoying ourselves, we have to be minding our business. Drunk or sober, mind your business.
So in terms of getting the process started, it means therefore that meetings should commence.
Meetings will begin
amongst the various parties.
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, I believe some meetings have already been set in terms of the looking at labor legislation, because that's another critical aspect of it. How do we ensure that the workforce is protected during this vulnerable period? And that will begin again in mid-February. So things are already in stream to make this a reality. But I have to say, very critical, trust is absolutely necessary. We have to be able to trust each other. We have to be able to be treated as equal partners. Now, before we go, there's one other aspect about this whole issue that I want to put on the table for the country: privatization. There have been some suggestions in some quarters, believe it or not, Hayden, that we should look at privatizing our crown jewels. Who are these crown jewels? You're talking about Petrotrin, NGC, NP, TSTT, First Citizens Bank. We have extreme difficulty with that, and we reject such a suggestion because we believe such a suggestion is anti-Trinidad and Tobago. In first instance, NGC, Petrotrin, and NP contributed $17.6 billion between 2010 and 2013 to the Treasury. That is for healthcare, education, roads, infrastructure, and all of the social programs we benefit from.
But the bulk of that came from NGC and NP.
Well, and Petrotrin, because even though they recorded a loss in about a year ago, prior to that, 2010, 2011, 2012, they contributed some $4.5 billion in 1 year, $5.2 billion in another year. So they have made contributions in terms of taxes and dividends. So they have made a contribution. And therefore, you do not want to, why would you want to take that $17.6 billion that go towards the the people of Trinidad and Tobago and put it into the pockets of privateers. We are against such notion, such a suggestion. We believe that the crown jewels is not just a question of state owning these entities. There's a more fundamental issue, and that is the right to self-determination. If we sell off our crown jewels, we as a people lose even more control of our destiny. And that has to be at the utmost part of our consciousness. In other words, independence was not just about putting up a new flag and singing a new anthem. It was the right to self-determination, where we as a people are able to have control and to be able to determine our own destiny. Now,
but you know, Mr. Warwick, this country has walked this road before. The ISPAT industry that was sold, the methanol plants and so on.
Well,
yes. In that era, we didn't have a choice.
Yeah, but what I want to
are we at the
suggest-
stage now where we may not have a choice?
No, we have choices.
Okay.
We have choices and we have alternatives.
But I think that is what has to be made abundantly clear to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that this time around, we certainly do have a lot more options.
We do have more options, and I think we need to explore these options. And we really need to, I think at this particular point in time, 2016, we have to see how we can really focus the energy and the potential of this country to grow our economy. I can't help but keep on emphasizing the importance of growing the economy, because if we just simply focus on riding through or simply floating, then when we hit a crisis such as this, which is low oil prices, low commodity prices, then we face a recession. There are ways in which we can avoid and which we can weather the storm, and this has to be growth. We need to be able to grow the economy, diversification. Maybe we are forced not so much to sell, but really we may be forced to diversify, because we've been talking it for a long time. On the Labor Day platform, since 2010, 2011, 2012, we kept hammering the point about diversifying the economy. Maybe in this particular crisis, what we are forced to do is not sell our crown jewels, but rather diversify the economy.
Yes, but the question then remains, in terms of transforming the economy, in terms of adopting new strategies and so on, to generate new revenue streams, what are some of the concessions that may be necessary on the part of the labor movement to get some of these things done?
Well, I think before we discuss concessions, we need to come around the table. Because you see, what you're going to do is ask us, what are your concessions before we reach the table? As what we see some people trying to do, which is to influence government policy even before we begin the dialogue. The focus right now has to be that we come around the table to have a dialogue, not consultation, because you could consult me and then do what you want, but have real, honest, genuine dialogue for us to be able to grow our way out of this crisis.
If you look at the energy sector right now, in terms of, what are some of the immediate things that we need to do, where would you focus? Would you focus on ensuring we are expanding our output? Would you focus on ensuring that we are encouraging more investment in production and exploration activity? Where would you focus your energies at this stage?
We need to ramp up production. I think so. It's a combination of ramping up our indigenous crude production that is absolutely necessary right now. We need to be able to encourage investment in terms of exploration, but because you mentioned it earlier, we also have to look at restructuring Petrotrin. We have to look at restructuring Petrotrin, and the union has a proposal and has a model which has worked, because it's not now we are just basing it on a theoretical framework. We actually put it in place, and it worked for 3 months. We ramped up production. We got additional 3,000 barrels per day during that period. So we're saying, listen, we have the model, we have the solution, we have an idea. Come around the table. Let us implement this new structure so that we have a much more efficient running Petrotrin, which is not just production, but also refining.
Have you made any overtures to the new board?
Yes.
to discuss these matters? What has been their response?
Thus far, we have been able to we did a presentation to the new board, and at the moment, the union and management is beginning discussions around how we can look to implement this new structure.
So you're looking forward to actually adopting these strategies? And
we believe it's the only way, Hayden. is the only way. We really, I mean, because a lot of work went into this this proposal. It wasn't just a proposal that came out of nowhere. It was through a lot of discussions with the workforce, people who have been in the industry for many years, 30, 40 years, who have looked at how the company had peaked at some point, fell at some point, saw where the challenges are, saw where the gaps are, and therefore the proposal is the culmination of a long process of discussions and dialogue with the workforce. The workforce is also behind this proposal. So can you imagine, you have your workforce behind a proposal which will see the company increase production, will see the company increase its productivity, increase efficiency, and I think that is good for the country. Not just for the Petrotrin workers, that is good for Trinidad and Tobago.
Is the Petrotrin model as broken as the Petrobras model in Brazil?
It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing because I'm happy to say, and I'll tell you why.
Are there similarities?
No, because in Brazil they do not have an oil field workers trade union.
Mr. Warwick, thank you so much. I certainly do wish you all the best in getting these matters resolved and moving the energy sector forward. We'll be listening, and we'll be learning. Folks, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about health and discuss health with a former Minister of Health. We'll be back.
The presence of heart disease in Trinidad and Tobago